unceded indigenous lands. The CUJAH Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and the waters on which we gather here today. CUJAH, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Furthermore, in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en, I'd like to acknowledge that there will be a walkout taking place today at 12 p.m. at Dorchester Square. This walkout is to support indigenous communities' fights against the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline on unceded indigenous lands. Since February, the RCMP has arrested around 28 land defenders and are still present on sovereign Wet'suwet'en territory today. It is important to keep this in mind as we move through a discussion on place listening, and we hope that those participating will have a peaceful walkout. Thank you all for being here with us this morning for the Concordia Undergraduate Journal of Art History's 9th Annual Conference on Place Listening, Exploring Material Narratives. I'd also like to give a special thanks to our speakers and our moderators for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us today, especially those of you joining in from out of Montreal. I'd like to thank the Gail and Stefan A. Jarislawski Institute for Studies in Canadian Art for contributing to this event and for providing us with the space. The Department of Art History, the Concordia Council on Student Life, Concordia University Alumni Association, the Fine Arts Student Alliance, and the Sustainability Action Fund for their further contributions in making this event possible. And lastly, I'd like to thank the members of the CUJAH team for planning and organizing this event and for being here with me every step of the way. It's been a pleasure working with you. Drawing on the concept of placemaking within contemporary landscapes, this conference aims to discuss the dynamic relationships between materiality, overlapping historical narratives, and involuntary memory to open a discourse for reconciliation. With a vast colonial history, material facets of everyday interactions in Canada can act as triggers and reminders of a violent past. Power distributions are tied into notions of nationhood, calling to mind the idea of a conditioned gaze that influence the way we move through space, and raises questions on the limitations of one's mobility. With Place Listening, Exploring Material Narratives, we invite you to think critically about the various power structures that continue to be at play and to explore the ways in which we can challenge these narratives of exclusion. To begin our discussions, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Elaine Speight, who is joining us through video call from England. She is a curator and research fellow at the University of Central Lancashire, and her curatorial interest surrounds the capacity for art to interrogate, mediate, and critique the connections between people and place and the relationship between art practice and research. Since 2005, she has co-curated In Certain Places, a program of art and architectural interventions and events based in the city of Preston. This work involved working with artists, architects, local authority planners, and other individuals with a stake in the city to help inform its future. Elaine has written about place-based art and curatorial practice for various publications. She is a trustee for the arts organization's Arts Team and a regional chair of the National Contemporary Visual Art Network. Today, she will begin by discussing the concept of place listening as an approach to cultural engagement, which is predicated upon collaborative partnerships and the development of long-term relationships within a place. Drawing on her work with In Certain Places, she will talk about how dissatisfaction with the instrumentalization of art practice within UK regeneration schemes has led to the cultivation of more critical, sustainable approaches. In contrast to the top-down nature of placemaking models of public art, these possess an auditory sensitivity which attends to the flow and the continually changing relationships of places. In doing so, they seek to stimulate sustainable, self-sufficient, locally distinctive economies and cultures as part of a wider process of place becoming. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Elaine Speight.
Hello from Manchester. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting presentation, which is the Ontology and Embodiment of Place Listening. So I hope I'm going to do that justice. So I suppose I'm going to be talking more today about the idea of place listening in relation to my practice in the place I work. So it's quite localised, but I think in terms of power structures, those are certainly present within processes of urban development that I'm going to be talking about. So place, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Want me to?
We were just turning up the volume, but it's all good.
Okay. Yeah, so place listening is a term that I developed about 6 or 7 years ago. And I used it to describe a particular approach to the provision of public art, but it could equally be used to talk about other types of interventions within public space, such as forms of architecture or urban planning. And I started using place listening to describe the work I was doing in the city of Preston, which is in the north of England, not far from Manchester. And it was really an antidote to the concept of placemaking, which was very popular during the last decade, and it continues to dominate discourses within the spheres of public art and urban design. But I find it really problematic for a few reasons that I'm going to talk about shortly. So I'm going to present this idea of place listening by describing a very small number of the projects that I've been involved with, and also the wider cultural and political context in which they've occurred. So I'm just going to try and see if I can get my slides up here. Okay. Just bear with me for a minute. Okay, let me try again. Sorry, I just can't, the slides are coming up. Right, let me just, tried it this morning and it worked. Okay. Let's try again.
Could you just make sure?
Do you have the slide?
I do. I can put it too, actually.
Because if I, oh, hang on, here we go. Right, let's see if this works.
Can you share the screen, please?
Yeah, just, is that working?
Yeah, it's loading right now.
Okay.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay. Oh, it's just, is that working, yeah?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, you can still hear me. Okay, great. So, this is me. And in certain places, that's the website of our organisation. So I'm going to start off by describing the place that I work. So this is Preston. It's a small post-industrial and predominantly working class, mainly white, but there's also quite a large South Asian population as well. It's in the northwest of England. It has a population of about 120,000. And it was granted city status in 2002, but it really feels when you live there or if you visit like a big market town. And unlike many northern towns in the UK, it has quite a strong economy. So British Aerospace, for example, is based there, and there's also the University of Central Lancashire, which has a campus on the edge of the city. So up near the train tracks you can see north of those. And it also has one of the largest student populations in the country. So In Certain Places began in 2003, and that was a time when a number of cities across the UK and Western Europe, as well as North America, were embarking upon regeneration schemes. And in Britain, these were informed by the new Labour government's urban renaissance agenda. So essentially, this was an attempt to improve the fortunes of post-industrial towns and cities, such as places like Preston and Manchester, by using public money to pump private investment and addressing the social problems associated with urban decline, such as high levels of crime and unemployment. And central to this, really, I think, was an effort to attract inward investment, in many cases by trying to encourage the middle classes who'd left the city centres years ago to move back. So in Preston, this took the form of the Tightwad scheme, so this is a plan for that. So this was a redevelopment scheme that was led by a private developer in partnership with the City Council, and it proposed to develop about 1/3 of the city centre. So if you look at this photo, it's kind of going from, if you see the kind of weird sort of spaceship looking building, it's kind of goes from that part of the kind of island between the ring roads up towards the back, so it's quite substantial. And the initial aim of in certain places was to create roles for artists within the development through a programme of temporary artworks, a series of public talks, and also a lead artist role within the master plan process. And this approach really reflected a wider trend for involving artists within regeneration. So, for example, during the 2000s, culture was widely heralded as a key factor within the revitalisation of international cities such as Bilbao, Barcelona and Chicago. And urban theorists such as sociologist Richard Florida, I'm sure you're familiar with, and whose work The Rise of the Creative Class influenced urban policy in the UK quite profoundly, claimed that the economic viability of post-industrial cities lay in their capacity to attract creative professionals through access to culture and a high quality of place. And this led to what became a kind of cross-pollination between arts and urban policy. And within this milieu, artists really became prized for their perceived contributions to the creation of places in which middle-class people would want to live. And this was quite often described as a process of placemaking. And across the UK, artists were recruited to a number of different jobs within regeneration schemes, such as providing decorative additions to the landscape, urban design features, or engaging communities within the redevelopment processes through forms of what is referred to as creative consultation. And in more ambitious scenarios, artists also had the opportunity to inform the early stages of public realm development as lead artists and consultants. However, I think within all these strands, the involvement of art was really positive as a flexible and, importantly, a low-cost way to transform cities. And one of the most cited examples of this effect in the UK is Anthony Gormley's Angel of the North, which you might be familiar with. So this is a huge 20 metres tall statue, which was commissioned as part of the regeneration of the post-industrial town of Gateshead, which is in the northeast of England. And the angel is often credited with helping to reverse the fortunes of Gateshead and also its adjoining city of Newcastle upon Tyne by creating what David Harvey refers to as collective symbolic capital. So these are the marks of distinction that can attract economic capital to a place and things that make it special and make people want to live there. So in reference to the angel, not only does it dignify the area's distinctive industrial heritage through the materials that it's made of, but also its status as a bold contemporary artwork by a celebrated artist, also signifies the reinvention of this post-industrial town into a visitor destination and a desirable place to live. And indeed, over time, the angel has become a really important tourist destination and a commercial tool for the North East. And the estate agent sign, I don't know if you call them that over there, but yeah, estate agents for selling houses have been quite keen to use the Angel of the North sign and sort of play fun on that. So it's become quite iconic in the North East and nationally. But what I think is really overlooked about the Angel was that it wasn't a standalone project that just happened, but it was built on well over a decade of art commissioning. So it's something that grew out of things that were already happening in a place rather than something that came in from the outside and magically transformed it. And also, as David Harvey points out, although collective symbolic capital is a product of the collective activities of people in a place, not everybody benefits from it. And indeed, quite a few people have criticised the regeneration of Gateshead Quayside, which was a context in which the Angel was commissioned as, quote, a yuppified enclave which brought few benefits to the surrounding area. And also there's a question of whose sense of place is enhanced by public art. So whilst over time many Gateshead residents have embraced the Angel of the North as part of their own identity, and I certainly think it is an important landmark for the North East, the commissioning of public art often caters to the tastes and aspirations of a desired, and generally middle class, rather than an existing and usually working class community. So, to return to Preston, during the early years of In Certain Places, so the early 2000s, I think we definitely drew upon some of this placemaking rhetoric to advocate for the involvement of artists within the Typhon scheme. However, fortunately, the opportunity to put this into practice disintegrated when, following the 2007 property crash, the Typhon scheme was abandoned. And also, by this time, the culture of public art in the UK, and I think more broadly, began to change as artists became disillusioned with the relationship between public art and regeneration. So they were often prevented from developing meaningful forms of engagement with places and communities, and they come to view their involvement within such schemes as shallow and tokenistic. And furthermore, a common emphasis upon predetermined outcomes of what the art should be had blunted their ability to provoke question or critique the situation. And it appeared that art had become reduced to a low-cost social ameliorative or a creative place marketing tool, which, in the words of Josephine Berry Slater and Anthony Yield, gave the impression of wholesale physical and social regeneration while masking the unadulterated or worsening conditions that affect the urban majority. As welfare is dismantled, public assets sold off, and free space is enclosed. But rather than signifying the decline of public art, I'd argue that the ensuing backlash against placemaking ideology informed a collective drive to influence urban processes through more sustained, situated, and critical forms of practice. So initiatives such as the long-running Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas, which functioned simultaneously as an art and a social housing project, became held up as examples of artists like urban renewal. And closer to home, closer to here, organisations such as ArtG, who work in the industrial town of Barrow, vocalise their commitments moving beyond economic models of urban development towards projects which stimulate sustainable, self-sufficient, locally distinctive economies and cultures. So in the case of In Certain Places, the failure of the Typhon scheme was a blessing in disguise, because it gave us the freedom to explore new ways of operating within a post-regeneration context, and also the time to instigate particular types of change within the city, which, although more subtle than we'd anticipated at the outset, have also been more profound. And in doing so, we've developed an approach to our practice, which to me feels more akin to the act of listening. And what I mean by this is that while placemaking models of public art generally appeal to the gaze through the production of visual identities for a place, In Certain Places and similar initiatives, which are predicated on long-term and situated engagement with a place, might be understood to possess what Paul Broadway describes as an auditory sensitivity. So one which is concerned with flows and continually changing relationships, rather than objects or parts or compositions or views. And I think as a corporate buzzword, listening has become a kind of meaningless concept. But in its true form, it's an engaged and vigorous process. So Jean-Luc Nancy, for example, points out that the French expression to denote listening, and I apologise for my accent here, tendre l'oreille, literally means to stretch the ear, denoting a conscious effort to know or understand something. And unlike the passive act of hearing, listening involves a strain towards a possible meaning and constitutes the embodied enactment of an intensification and concern, a curiosity or an anxiety. So, as such, public art practices which possess auditory rather than visual sensibilities are informed by a desire to experience, comprehend, and contribute to the future of their locale as part of a wider community. And what I describe as a place listening form of public art can be identified by two main features, which are also interrelated aspects of listening. So the first is a durational and open-ended approach, and the second is an embodied and sensory engagement with the place. And this approach could be seen as a reaction to the top-down, time-restricted nature of many place-making commissioning models. And I think by grounding themselves socially and culturally and physically within a place, artists and curators are able to develop an intimate connection with the context of their practice. And at the same time, the surroundings also provide a testing ground to collaborators and audiences for new works and ideas, and a context in which to examine the significance and impact of wider social themes. So, so to illustrate how this might translate into practice, I'm going to talk quite briefly about a very small number of our projects and the way in which, through collaboration with other agencies and individuals, they inform alternative ideas within the city about what regeneration would mean. And in particular, I'm going to focus on this place here, which is the city's market square, which is known locally as the Flag Market. So this is one of our, this is our very first commission. It was in 2005. It was by a Danish artist called CUJAH. And personally, it's one of the least artistically interesting projects that we've done, I think. But what was really significant about it was the way in which it encouraged decision makers in the city to engage with the city's public spaces in embodied and sensory ways, rather than thinking in a purely kind of visual, top-down way about what redevelopment might mean. So the work's called Appearing Rooms. It's essentially an interactive water sculpture. And Yen was adamant that it should be installed in the market square. And the problem was that this was the first time that anything like this, anything at all, had happened in Preston, and the council were really afraid of taking risks. So it took a very long time to convince them to let us do it. So in the end, Appearing Rooms was installed in the market square for about 6 weeks. And luckily it was really hot summer, so people spent a lot of time playing on it and hanging out in the square. And what was remarkable was that it completely transformed the place from somewhere that people would just cut through to get to somewhere else into a social and performative space where people wanted to spend time. And it prompted people to start thinking about how the Flag Market, which really didn't feature within the Time Bar project, might function outside of a purely retail-driven agenda, and how it might become an important social space for the city. So this led to a number of council initiatives to enhance the square, as well as more projects by us. So, for example, this is quite a lot later, in 2013. We worked with an architectural firm to create the Harris Flight, so this staircase you see at the bottom. So this was a temporary staircase that invited people directly into this building, which is a Harris Museum and Art Gallery. So the city's public art gallery also has a library at the bottom. And the problem with this building is, as you can see on the top photo, it's got a very blank facade. And apparently a lot of people don't even realise that it's open to the public. I know, for example, I grew up there, and one of my brothers never even been in because he didn't know that you could, or even what was in there. So the idea was to kind of open it up and democratise it a bit. So the stairs were installed for 5 weeks, and they were accompanied by a programme of cultural and community events. which were organised by the council. And during their installation, the flights increased visits to the Harrison Museum by 70%. So this led to the regular programming of cultural events in the square, and also a big ongoing capital project to open up the museum and really think about how it can be become a hub for the community. And a couple of years after that, we developed the People's Canopy in collaboration with the Beijing-based People's Architecture Office. So essentially this is a huge festival canopy on wheels which can be pedalled to different locations and opened up to transform unused public space for social use. And we developed it in part as a way to try and connect the university and the city centre, which although they're right next to each other, culturally feel quite remote. So on the part of the road where you can see the kind of timber frame building, that's part of where the university is, and the other side is the city centre, and it's dissected by a ring road which goes around it, and they do feel like two very distinct parts of the city. So it's about trying to connect those, but also just trying to think about how we can better use spaces in the city. If you've ever been to North England, you probably know that it rains a lot. So the idea was that if you could provide something that could keep people dry, we could use open air spaces a lot more. So it was used in particular as a hub for a new biennial festival, which takes place in the Market Square, and it was set up in 2015 by the council in collaboration with a number of community groups, cultural organisations and artists. So unlike appearing rooms, the People's Canopy was developed in collaboration with Preston City Council. And if you look at the history of In Certain Places, there's a really clear trajectory of the way in which our relationship with the council has developed and strengthened through each project. And as an aspect of place listening, a long-term commitment to working within a place is particularly important. Because I think quite often public art or regeneration programmes are characterised by an emphasis upon quick wins or short-term outcomes. And this can be really problematic, because if you're not absolutely connected with the cultural and social life of a place and have real embodied knowledge of it, you're not in a position to know what types of things are going to enhance that experience. And the other thing that generational working allows is the building of relationships and trust. So the curator Paul O'Neill describes long-term approaches to art commissioning as like a constellation of intersecting ideas and moments of production, with many actors, advisory roles, publics and agencies at work, leading to such a multiplicity of practice that it makes such projects impossible to grasp in their entirety. And I think that's really true of In Certain Places, which through our involvement in Preston has become more than the sum of its parts. So for each of our projects, there's generally a whole network of people who contribute to the creation of the work. So that can be council workers, artists, academics, local businesses, and other members of the community. So this is a diagram I drew about 7 or 8 years ago. You can't really see it very well, unfortunately, but hopefully it gives you an idea. So it was to help visualise kind of networks that In Certain Places produced. So each of the, I don't know if you can see them, but each of the coloured bits, the red coloured bits is a project, and then it shows the different people who helped make those happen. And again, Paul O'Neill talks about the significance of such long-term initiatives lying not in a single extended project, but rather in the relationship between projects in a place across time. And one of the things I'm really interested in is how public art can generate forms of momentum which can lead to change within the place. And one of the main changes that these activities have made in Preston is to encourage the council to look to the city for its own solutions. So in contrast to the type art scheme, which really took a tabula rasa approach to redeveloping the city centre, the council now take what's sometimes called an urban dentistry approach to development. So that's where you fix things that need improving or to enhance the elements of work. But in order for this to be effective, again, you really need to have a very sophisticated and on-the-ground understanding of the place. And this brings me to an important point I wanted to make about artists and place listing. So we work with artists from across the world, and the examples that I've shown you so far are boosting the bees. And I think it is really useful to get that external perspective. However, the embodied knowledge which local artist communities possess is just, if not more, valuable. And we're really lucky in Preston to have some fantastic artists who we've been able to work with over the years. So these include people such as Rebecca Chesney, who's looked at issues of air pollution within the city and thinking about alternative infrastructure to address that. Ian Broadley, who's worked with people in the city, particularly teenagers, who identify themselves as part of certain subcultures and to give them visibility that they felt they lacked. And also Olivia Keith, who's recently undertaken a long-term mapping project in the north of Preston, which is very rural, but is at the moment just about to become quite heavily developed for housing, which I'll talk about in a minute. So one of the things I've always tried to do within certain places is make sure that we actively support the practice and also the professional profile of artists from Preston and the wider northern region, which is often overlooked. So, for example, between 2013 and 2019, I ran a project called Practice in Place, which involved developing partnerships between artists from the north of England and researchers from across the UK from other disciplines who were exploring similar aspects of place in their work. And the main reason for this was that it seemed to me there's a lot of artists doing really important and interesting research about place, but for various reasons, predominantly the ridiculous cost of attending most academic conferences, they're often shut out of academic debates and discourse. So Practicing Place was a way to bring artists into these debates that were happening, whilst also helping to raise their profile and generating interdisciplinary collaborations. So the project involved a series of public events across the country and developed relationships between artists and academics, and also this book of collaborative essays and artworks. I think Bunny has one. I'm going to send us some more. You can buy them from that URL if you're interested. And another point I want to make, which is pretty obvious, but I think sometimes people forget, is that artists are people and they experience places in the same embodied and often mundane ways as anyone else. So as parents or homeowners or parents, for example. So one of our current projects is the Expanded City, and this is a 3-stage research project developed in response to an invitation by the City Council to contribute to a very large-scale housing and infrastructure scheme on the outskirts of Preston. So this involves the immense house building that I was talking about before. So we've been working with artists from Preston to look at some of the issues associated with the scheme. So yeah, one of the problems is that it involves building around 5,000 houses on what is essentially greenbelt land, and then putting in the necessary roads to accommodate the extra traffic, so it's quite regressive in that way. And also what's lacking from the scheme is any kind of social, cultural or environmental infrastructure. And this is what we've been working with artists to really look at. So one of the artists doing this is Gavin Renshaw, who's from Preston, and he's a really keen cyclist. And over 20 years of cycling in Preston, he's developed a very sophisticated internal cycling map of the city. And this includes such things as topography, places you can store your bike, where you can get it fixed, and also some of the challenges in negotiating the city in this way, particularly if you have mobility issues. So obviously the picture that shows a cycle path through a local park is just kind of ridiculous. And the other image here shows a cycle route that takes you from the north of Preston right into the city centre, and beyond the fence that you see is the train station, and there's a new cycle hub there, but then there's this crazy fence. So actually to get to the train station you have to go back round up a really steep hill, and it takes you an extra 20 minutes. So any potential for commuting is kind of disrupted by that. So he's drawn on all this embodied knowledge to produce a very comprehensive cycling resource, and this has provided the starting point for his involvement with the transport consultants being employed by the council. to ensure that safe and cycling infrastructure, particularly in relation to commuting in and out of the city, is integrated within the scheme. So just to finish, I want to say that by taking a place listening approach to our work, which prioritises embodied experience and long-term commitment to a place, we've been able to effect change in the city as part of a wider community. However, in recent years, I've become increasingly concerned with the importance of listening to experiences of place which are more often overlooked within urban development and placemaking schemes. So those of older or disabled people, for example. And I'm currently working on a project to look at how new mothers experience public space and how this could be used to inform urban design approaches. And so I'd be really interested in finding out more about how you all might have interpreted and employed ideas of place listening within your own practices, particularly in this kind of wider context of nationhood that Maggie was talking about. So I'm currently on maternity leave with 2 small children who are going to need feeding soon, so I can't stay with you for all of the conference today, but I hope it goes really well and look forward to finding out more. Also, if anybody wants a copy of this book, hang on, let me just Okay, can you see me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No. Hang on. Oh, hang on.
There we go. We can see you now.
That better. Okay, you can see me now. So if anyone wants a copy of this book, which was published in 2014, and it's kind of an overview of the first 10 years of the project, we have a few of these that I can just send you. So if you get my email address off by here, I'll put it in post to you. So, but yeah, any questions or anything?
Sounds good. Does anyone have any questions for Elaine? I'm quite curious with this book, Practicing Place, that I believe was edited last year.
Yeah, last year, yeah.
Is this just a collection of the works that you've done throughout Preston?
No. That's the project I was talking about before, about pairing artists and academics. Mm-hmm. So this is what came out of that. So the idea was to, it was about another form of listening. So bringing together academics and artists, but rather than just putting them in the room to have one conversation, really developing a relationship over time. So it was kind of like someone called it like a dating agency for artists and academics. So I brought artists that I knew together with academics that I'd come across through research. And the idea was that they'd find out about each other's research and practice that were around shared interests. So for example, there are people who were interested in sound, people who were interested in kind of like the everyday experience of place, people who are interested in urban control and disruptions to that. And yes, so I paired them up, and they spent quite a lot of time having conversations together, communicating via email and Skype, and then we did a public event where they talk about their shared interests, and then they went away and developed collaborative projects. So each of the chapter in the book, this is just one of the outcomes here, each of the chapter is a kind of collaborative project between an artist and academic, so it's the outcome of them both listening to each other about their work. So some of those are essays, some are creative projects, there's a sound piece that's associated with it. So yeah, it was just like thinking about another kind of space where art can happen.
Alright, thank you so much, Elaine. That gives us something to think about. Alright, well, I believe you're also sending a copy of...
Yeah, I'll send you a couple of copies. Yeah, that's good to send you a couple
Yeah,
of copies.
so they'll be available throughout the department. I believe we have one question.
Do we have time?
For a quick question. Well, thanks again, Elaine. Thank you so much.
Okay, no worries. I might stick around for a bit until my children get back, so is that okay? Can I listen?
Oh,
Or have you
sure.
got someone else going too?
No, our next panel will be our first student panels, and it'll feature Diane Hao Yu Wong and